Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the greatest show on earth. It's the Take Your Shot podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gitman, and we are just rolling through the punches here on this fantastic Friday as our NBA Finals are officially set. We know our Eastern Conference champions, the Boston Celtics, and they will be facing the new and utterly surprising Western Conference champions, the Dallas Mavericks. June 6th is game one. It'll be in TD Garden in Boston, and it is going to be great. But I want to get into what happened in game five in the Western Conference Finals and why Dallas did ultimately end up winning the Western Conference. In game five, it was an absolute blowout. It wasn't even close. The Mavericks won 124 to 103, and the score doesn't even tell you how much of a dominant performance that was by the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks pretty much led wire to wire. Actually, I think they did lead wire to wire. It was an all-out performance by them, and they really wanted to silence the haters because even though they still were up 3-1, questions still rose. Even I started raising some of those questions. Could the Timberwolves actually do it? Yes, it was early, but still, we raised those questions. Could the Timberwolves win four straight? They got two out of the last three at home, and Dallas silenced the haters. I don't think anybody, including myself, expected the Mavericks to come into Minnesota and respond like that the way this series was going, and that the fact that they already won two games in Minnesota, it's just surprising that they won a third game. I'm pretty sure, me included, everybody thought that this series was going back to Dallas for a game six, and this series was going to be an interesting one and a potential storyline for Minnesota coming back from 3-0, but it was not. Let's talk about it. Luka Doncic. My goodness, Luka Doncic scored 20 points in the first period. I think he had 20 of the first 35 of Dallas's points. I think it was 20 actually of the first 30 points in the first period. Luka Doncic outscored the Timberwolves himself 20-19 in the first period. Although he would have a somewhat decent second half, 36 points, a little bit worse than what he did in the first quarter, obviously. That Luka Doncic set the tone, set the pace for the Dallas Mavericks, and it went uphill from there. The scoring that Luka brought, the tough shots that Luka hit to start the game, the contested threes, the deep threes, he was shooting them from half court. Even Chris Finch said in his post-game press conference, "What are we supposed to do about Luka Doncic? He is shooting these three-pointers from way out." And the fact that Luka decided to do this in the closeout game, we remember what he did a couple years ago in Phoenix in game seven in the conference semifinals. Much different situation, of course. It's winner go home. Still on the road, underdog, making a statement to end a team season. And did Luka Doncic do that with this Dallas Mavericks squad once again? And I just cannot believe what I witnessed from him, what I witnessed from the Minnesota Timberwolves, which we'll get into in a couple of minutes, and what I witnessed just overall, it was just, again, I'll say it, just a complete shock. Then you had in the second quarter, second half, Kyrie Irving taking over the game a little bit. Luka goes to the bench. Oh, no problem. Kyrie Irving gets up on there and starts scoring after he had a struggling first quarter. It's like he was taking a step back for Luka Doncic to cook and do his thing. And then Kyrie Irving came in the second period when he sat out a little bit at the end of the first while Luka's sitting. And then all of a sudden just got to what we know Kyrie Irving can do. And those two scores are historic. Those two guys can just score the ball at an absolutely ridiculous rate, and it's something we've never seen before in NBA history. And we'll get a little bit more deeper into that as well in the next segment. But those two have just been incredible to watch. We didn't think it would work because those two play similar games. When the Kyrie Irving trade actually happened last year at the trade deadline, I was like, this doesn't really make any sense. Luka, Kyrie, both similar guys, both want the ball in their hands, both score the ball. I didn't think it would work out. But this trade was a perfection for Dallas. And they didn't even have to give that much up for Kyrie Irving. They only gave up Spencer Dinwiddie, who hasn't really been great for the Lakers currently, not really great when he went back to Brooklyn, and Dorian Finney-Smith, who's been solid, but at the end of the day, when you're getting Kyrie Irving, it's Kyrie Irving. It's worth it to give up Dorian Finney-Smith. So that trade was an absolute success for the Dallas Mavericks. And what Nico Harrison, the GM, the president of operations for the Mavericks, has done for this team ever since the last year's trade deadline, it was a disaster for Dallas. The fact that they traded for Kyrie Irving, drafted Daniel, not drafted Daniel Gafford. They traded for Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. They drafted Derek Lively. That's who I was thinking of. They made the perfect moves to surround Luka Doncic with enough defense, someone else to help him score, which is something that we've had concerns and questions raised about Dallas. And they had the perfect team built around him in order to contend and compete for a title, which they are 4 wins away from finishing the job. The defense of the big guys, Kyrie being that second scorer for Luka, perfection by Nico Harrison. So you got to give a lot of credit there. Then you've also got to give Jason Kidd a lot of praise as well. Jason Kidd was really not known as the best head coach. Jason Kidd had his issues in Brooklyn, fired in Milwaukee, and he didn't have the reputation to be a great NBA head coach. He got this job offer when he was an assistant with the Lakers after winning an NBA title with the Lakers in 2020. He got the job to be the Dallas Mavericks head coach. He took it, was the former Dallas point guard, and really just familiar with the guys in the front office, familiar with the system, and was a perfect guy to really coach Luka, because Luka and Jason Kidd really have similar sort of games. Obviously, we know that Luka Doncic is probably going to be more talented at the end of the day than Jason Kidd, but Jason Kidd was nearly on the same level in his prime that Luka Doncic has been. A point guard, a distributor, someone who's a leader, someone who takes not necessarily the best on defense, but tries his effort on defense. And Jason Kidd even did a little bit of complaining. It seemed like the perfect fit, and it was, and that was a solid hire, and Jason Kidd has saved his reputation as a head coach, because at the trade deadline, there was questions about Jason Kidd. People wanted to fire Jason Kidd as a head coach. People did not want Jason Kidd in Dallas, and there was a lot of Mavericks fans, even ones I know personally, that weren't really too fond of him. And then they start winning. Jason Kidd is this great guy, and he's really done a great job with the Dallas Mavericks. 2 conference finals in 3 years, considering the state of the Western Conference, and now a finals appearance. You've got to give Kidd a lot of credit there. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you've got the other guys. You've got the PJ Washingtons, Jarek Jones. We've talked all about them. Those guys have been incredible for Dallas and really stepped up. PJ Washington has been someone who's really elevated scoring, getting to the corner, along with Derek Jones, other guys on the Dallas roster as well, really getting to the corner, finding their spots, and executing their roles to perfection, and just being in the spots, setting up Luka Doncic, setting up Kyrie to perfection. Just the perfect players to work around 2 talented point guards, 2 talented scoring dominant point guards who attract the defense and pass great and elite passers. Perfect guys to build around them. And overall, this roster was constructed very, very great. It didn't necessarily have the team to beat Denver, but it had a team that could play on both sides of the ball, and you have 2 elite scorers. And if you have a great defense and you have 2 elite scorers, you can contend in this league, in the NBA, and potentially have the opportunity to win a title. Now let's go to the other side of things here with the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves in this game, it was a no-show. It was an absolute embarrassment. You look at what they did in game 4. You saw the momentum from Karl-Anthony Towns. You saw the momentum from Anthony Edwards. And it looked like, hey, if Minnesota can win this game 5, now we've got an interesting series. And it just felt like Minnesota was like, okay, we just don't want to get swept here. We're definitely not beating you 4 times in a row, Dallas. We'll just not get swept. And here's your game 5, game over. That's what it looked like. Seriously, I'm not even joking. Obviously, I'm not saying Minnesota played like that, but that's what it looked like, because Minnesota just did not show up. They were running their offense early in the game around Rudy Gobert. It worked for a little bit, but at the end of the day, this is Rudy Gobert, and we know Rudy Gobert's capability on the offensive end. Nada. So Minnesota had a lot of problems in this game. They really looked stagnant. They were lazy on defense. It was not the defense I saw against the Denver Nuggets. It was a completely different team, in my opinion. In those games 2 and game 7s, I saw a historic defense. I saw a defense that could have made the argument that they are one of the best of all time. And in this series, we've seen a defense that's been lazy, giving up wide open shots, messing up coverages, messing up pick and rolls. Drop coverage has been weak. giving up easy alley-oops because of the weak drop coverage. Dallas has broken down Minnesota's defense, and it could be a Minnesota thing, could be a Dallas thing, could be a little bit of both. But Minnesota's defense was a no-show in this series. And considering they have two dominant guards who can score the ball, and the fact that your defense didn't show up, are we really surprised about the result of this series? I picked Minnesota in 5 because I was assuming, hey, their defense shows up. Look what can happen. We saw it against Denver. Why not against Dallas? And unfortunately for them, and for some strange reason, the Timberwolves just did not show up at all on defense. And it really showed in this game. And especially pretty early, you could tell that Minnesota was done. In the other games, it was a little bit different because the Timberwolves and the Mavericks were pretty much in these close, tight battle, contested games. All of the games, I think, for the first 4 at least, were separated by only 18 points. So they were very, very close games. And this game was the exact opposite of it. Dallas was really up 30 for most of the second half. And it just made no sense. Dallas got offensive rebounds. Dallas got their mid-range jump shots easy. They got wide open threes. This was not the defense that I saw earlier, and I'm pretty disappointed in what Minnesota's potential could have been. Yes, they're a nice, bright team, and they're going to be great in the future, and we'll get into their lights out segment in a little bit. But this series was an absolute embarrassment because, quite frankly, I thought Minnesota was the better team. I really did, and I still think they are. I think even though Dallas may have the 2 best players, you could make the argument that the next 4 are with the Timberwolves. You really could. I just don't understand what happened to the Timberwolves in this series. Maybe it was because the best 2 players on Dallas were just that good, but we just don't know what happened. And then in this series as well, of course, Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards didn't really show up in the fourth quarter, but in this game 5, it wasn't like that. Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards were actually the only ones to perform. It was the role guys who weren't really doing their job, and the role guys really did their jobs in games 1 through 4, and it wasn't Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards who didn't do their jobs in the first 4 games. But Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, great in this game. Karl-Anthony Towns got offensive rebounds, got to the foul line, got his 2-point shot going. Anthony Edwards doing what he's supposed to do as well, hitting shots, hitting tough contested shots, which is what you're supposed to do as the best scorer on your team. The problem is, can you really trust Minnesota's role players to be consistent every night? You know you're probably going to have one of these games where, oh, the role players aren't playing that well. We're probably going to lose. Minnesota had opportunities to win other games in the series. You look at game 1, game 2, prime opportunities, and they could have been up 3-1 in the series going into game 5. They really could have. They really could have done so, and they didn't take advantage of the opportunities in the clutch, and ultimately that cost them. You cannot look at this game 5 individually as, oh, Minnesota didn't show up. The role players didn't show up. The role players were the only reason why Minnesota got to this point. They probably would have gotten swept without the role players. It was the fact that the stars, Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, didn't really show up. Yes, it's their first time in the conference finals. It's the Timberwolves' first time in the conference finals in 20 years. Maybe the moment's a little too big for them this year. I don't know, but the one thing that you can say about a championship team, you always have to have your hardships. You always have to have your struggles before you finally get to the mountaintop, before you finally get that elusive title, that elusive championship. It's hard to win a championship, even though we saw what they did against Denver. It's still hard. It was my fault for assuming that Dallas was going to be a breeze because this Dallas team is serious and for real. But sometimes the moment is a little bit too big, and Minnesota was not ready for the moment this time. And I expect them, if they're in a similar situation next season, or maybe in 2 seasons, maybe even further down the line, who knows? I think the Timberwolves will be much better prepared, and I think they will be a formidable team, and they will be much harder to beat than they were this year. And I trust that. I definitely do trust that because the role players were great. The stars didn't. It was really the stars, and that was it. That's all you can ask for. You got the production from Jaden McDaniels, who was great the entire postseason, really showing offensive flashes that we haven't seen all year. We know what Naz Reid can do, 6th man of the year. We also saw Kyle Anderson in these conference finals really shine. Nikhil Alexander-Walker doing this thing as well. It wasn't them. And I would try to keep those role players as long as possible if you're Minnesota. I really would because they all play great. you really don't have any complaints about them. It's the fact that Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns. That's it. And even Rudy Gobert you can put in there. And one thing that was really weird about this series before we move on was the fact that Minnesota didn't really hit a lot of their free throws. They struggled from the free throw line. So did Dallas a little bit. But the Timberwolves, if they hit a little bit more of their free throws, they probably would have been in positions to win games in this series. And we know, as I mentioned, how close the deficits were. So every little thing matters. Dallas just outshot them, outworked them on both sides of the ball, which is something, especially on the defensive end, we did not expect in this particular series. So Minnesota goes down, and we will get into their lights out segment in a little bit. But first, I want to bring up a topic that's really been rising these past couple of days: this Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic backcourt. We know their greatness. We know how great they are. But are they the best scoring backcourt of all time? That is the question that's being brought up. TNT brought it up. I know Stan Van Gundy, Reggie Miller, two great guys on the call. They are convinced that those two are the greatest scoring backcourt of all time. And the crew, Chuck, Kenny, and Shaq, not thinking so quite yet. So do I think this is a valid argument? This is a valid point. I'm going to have to say yes on this one, because you look at the other great scoring backcourts of all time. You look at all the other great backcourts of all time: Curry, Thompson, Isaiah Thomas, and Joe Dumars. Like, there is a lot of great NBA backcourts in the history of basketball. And you just look at them, and yes, they all have scoring ability. And yes, they are all great in the clutch. And they all really got the job done for their teams, and they've all won titles. These great backcourts have won NBA championships. And yet, this group this duo with Kyrie Irving, with Luka Doncic, they've really given me this sort of vibe, this sort of sense that they just are so lethal together. They are just unstoppable together on the floor. Yes, Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, as I mentioned. Even Michael Jordan, Ron Harper, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, if you even count that. Curry, Thompson, Magic Johnson, Michael Cooper. You've got all of those great backcourts. And yet, I still think Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are the greatest scoring backcourt of all time. And yes, it's scoring backcourt. Remember, look at scoring. I'm not saying they're the greatest backcourt of all time. I am not saying that. I think personally that you still got to give that to Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson, the two greatest shooters that God has ever created. You got to give it to them. But scoring wise, two guys that I'm like, oh, I'm giving the ball to close range, mid range, 3-point shot. Two guys that I want to have the ball in their hands, to score the ball, to give me a consistent scoring performance, to give me a bucket when needed. I'm taking Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, because those two guys' ability on the courts, those two guys' purpose and their roles are to score, 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 and score. We saw it in this game 5. We've seen it in the other games in this series, and it's really hard to outduel them. Just really, really hard. Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns couldn't do it. Paul George, James Harden couldn't do it. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, it's really hard to do it. And I don't think even Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown could do it either. I still think in the finals, we'll have our finals preview on Monday. I still don't think that Tatum and Brown will outduel this duo. I just think the greatness of their ability to hit shots, hit tightly contested shots, attack from the double team, and still find ways to draw fouls, get to the free throw line, and score at will is something that we have not seen in NBA history before. Because what I saw in this game 5, Luka Doncic going for 20, then Kyrie Irving, here we go. He's going for 20 now and a quarter. It is just unstoppable when you have two guys like that. It really is. You can stop one guy like that. You can definitely do that. You can force doubles. But when you've got two guys with that ability, it's something we just really haven't seen in NBA history before. And it's partly because of the scoring ramp up. And it's just partly because of their two greatnesses, their greatness of the game of basketball. Maybe you could make the argument that, hey, Elgin Baylor, Jerry West could be on that, but scoring wasn't really an emphasis back then. It was low scoring games. Maybe if Jerry West and Elgin Baylor played in today's game, more recognition, you can make that argument. But Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving have just been that historic, that great. And that's why I believe that they are definitely the greatest scoring backcourt of all time. Again, not greatest backcourt of all time, but greatest scoring backcourt of all time. But let's go on to the segment that probably some Timberwolves fans are waiting for, the lights out segment to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They don't really have a lot to do this offseason, so this will probably be a quick segment. They have, for the unrestricted free agents, Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, Monte Morris, TJ Warren, and Deshaun Nix. Kyle Anderson, I expect them to re-sign. He may go somewhere else if a team offers him like $15 million a year. I don't really expect that to happen. Timberwolves can give Kyle Anderson a lot of money because the Timberwolves are not in the luxury tax. They're not in a position where they are going to need to lowball some players, going to need to let players walk. They are in a comfortable position with the luxury tax regarding to the first apron and second apron as well. They're nowhere near that. So the Timberwolves, they should be fine to potentially even overpay for some guys. This is a really good financial situation for the Timberwolves. McLaughlin and Monte Morris, maybe pick one of them to re-sign. You don't really need both. Both are backup point guards, play the same position. TJ Warren, I know he played some regular season minutes for Minnesota, but didn't really do much in the postseason. They can decide on his future. And then Deshaun Nix is, I think he's a two-way, so they'll see if they want to retain him. And then restricted free agents for Minnesota, all they got is Luka Garza. They may let him go. Luka Garza's been bouncing from the Pistons to the Timberwolves, and I think he went back to the Pistons, and now he's back with the Timberwolves. So he's really been bouncing around those two teams. Whatever they do with him is whatever they do with him, but essentially their free agent situation, their free agency will not be really that significant. I'm not saying they're going to sign this great player. I don't think they don't have the money to do that. But they do have the money where they can maybe re-sign some guys, maybe pick up another veteran guy off the bench for 10 to $15 million, something like that. But they can't afford a max player. They're not in that situation, but they can definitely improve upon what they already have. And well, that's the beauty of it, because Minnesota, as I said, they had a disappointing finish. Of course, we expected them to have a more competitive fight in the series against the Mavericks, but Minnesota had their best season since 2004. This Timberwolves franchise has been miserable. They have not experienced winning in a very long time. Anthony Edwards has given them hope. So even with the disappointment in the conference finals, Minnesota is one of the teams that have the brightest future in the NBA, and I'm guaranteeing you that they will win an NBA title in the next 10 seasons. It's going to happen. If Anthony Edwards continues to remain on the Timberwolves, they will win a title eventually. It will be their time. Trust me. Minnesota is in a great position. So there's nothing to worry about if you're a Timberwolves fan. And then they do have one extension with Rudy Gobert. That'll be maybe their offseason storyline because, yes, Rudy Gobert is Rudy Gobert, a four-time Defensive Player of the Year. But is Minnesota going to pay him that much money? Because we know Rudy Gobert may be undervalued to some franchises, maybe overvalued to others. I personally think he's a little bit overrated. I don't think he's that great defensively. He's not really a reliable offensively. So it'll be interesting to see how Minnesota views his impact on the team this season and beyond, because those extension talks could get very interesting with Rudy Gobert, and that could be something that we could be talking about this offseason if things go south. They may not trade Rudy Gobert, considering what they had to give up in order to get Rudy Gobert. Of course, the Larry Markkinen, he's an all-star, 5 first-round picks, even Walker Kessler. It was a huge trade. And last season, we were like, this may be the worst trade of all time. This season, little bit not so bad, considering what Minnesota was able to do. Rudy Gobert was great this season in the regular season, not necessarily the postseason. So we'll see how they evaluate Rudy Gobert's performance and evaluate what he is worth market-wise. And what I think Minnesota needs to improve on, as I mentioned, I think they need to get another guy off the bench. I like their 8-man rotation in the playoffs with their starting 5 and then off the bench, Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson. I like that. But I think they may need one more guy to just glue it out. Maybe a backup point guard, maybe just someone to help Mike Conley out a little bit. Because I love Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I don't think he's necessarily a backup point guard. And Anthony Edwards, he can handle the ball a little bit, but I don't want Anthony Edwards handling the ball. I want Anthony Edwards being set up to score. That's what I want out of Anthony Edwards. So maybe Minnesota can explore getting a backup point guard. Maybe Monte Morris is that guy for them, and maybe they just play him in the regular season and continue this lineup in the postseason. But I would liked to see a backup point guard play this postseason, especially Mike Conley's really getting up there in age. He could start getting some injury issues. And I love Mike Conley, don't get me wrong. He's one of my favorite players, actually, for the way he plays, the way he distributes, the way he's a leader, the way he sets up his teammates and plays defensively. I love Mike Conley, but he's getting up there. He is definitely getting up there. So maybe in the draft, you draft a backup point guard. And maybe in the second round, maybe potentially do something else to help your team out a little bit. If I'm not mistaken, let me look at Minnesota's draft picks. Minnesota has the 27th pick. They do have their first round pick, and then they have the 37th pick from the Memphis Grizzlies. So maybe they can draft a backup point guard with their 27th pick in the first round. That's something they could potentially explore there. But other than that, Minnesota's in a great position. Yes, it's a tough Western Conference, but they have the roster to compete and contend in this West, and they'll be right back in the mix next year. Wouldn't be surprised if they were projected the favorites in the Western Conference over Denver and over this current Dallas Mavericks team, unless, of course, one of them make a splash, which most likely not going to happen. So Minnesota, just get him maybe another player or two to improve the depth a little bit. And other than that, I really like this team, and I really like the direction they are going. Next season, you may potentially, based off Karl-Anthony Towns' performance, you may need to explore trading him. I think you give him one more year. You give him the opportunity to have a chance to be that second guy on this championship contending team. But if he is not that, he is not a second guy on a championship team, then Minnesota may need to explore trading him next offseason. But for this offseason, like what they're doing, they don't need to make a lot of changes, and they are in a very, very good position. So that's my spiel on Minnesota. But let's move on to the Boston Celtics here, as we are going to talk about them a little bit in this next week, as they are pretty much resting for 9 days essentially before the NBA Finals start, June the 6th, Thursday, Game 1 in Boston at 8:30 on ABC. So the question I'm going to bring up about the Celtics in this Finals, who will be their most important player? Because there has been questions circling around, is it Tatum? Is it Brown? Is it someone else? And I'm going to give you my opinion on this. The Boston Celtics' most important player is Jrue Holiday. I think it's Jrue Holiday. Jason Tatum is up there. Jason Tatum, you can make the argument for him as well. I'd probably have him a close second. I think Jaylen Brown, more of a scoring guy. You can't really dictate what he's going to do. He really brings it every night, especially in this postseason. Derek White is Derek White. He plays his role just like Jrue Holiday, but I think Jrue Holiday is the key for the Celtics. I don't think a lot of people have been talking about Jrue Holiday this season because of his scoring. He hasn't really scored the ball that much, really has taken a step back from what his Milwaukee Bucks role is offensively, and has mostly been this defensive-centric guy like he always has been in his career. He's always been this defensive-first kind of guy, but especially this season, considering Boston's offensive options and offensive weapons, Jrue Holiday didn't necessarily need to put that much emphasis on that side of the ball, so he mostly focused on defense. So not a lot of people are talking about him, but the defensive plays he made throughout the playoffs for Boston, the defensive plays we've seen him make from Milwaukee, remember the steal, the lob to Giannis, that was one of the biggest plays in NBA Finals history. Jrue Holiday is going to have to guard Luka Doncic. He's going to have to guard Kyrie Irving. I don't know which one he's going to guard yet. Maybe Luka Doncic. I'm not sure. But Jrue Holiday is, in my opinion, the best perimeter defender in this league. Yes, Derek White's up there as well, which even better for Boston, right? Marcus Smart, the former Celtics guard, he's even up there as well. But I think Jrue Holiday, personally, is the best perimeter defender in this entire league. And he is going to have a tough challenge. And if he finds ways to stop that backcourt, stop what I believe is the greatest scoring backcourt of all time, the Celtics will be in a position to win the finals because Dallas runs their offense through Kyrie and Luka. We all know that. We all know what Dallas's game plan is, and we know how much they heavily rely on Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving to not only score, but to distribute, run the offense, give everybody else the opportunity. So if Drew Holiday can lock him up, force the ball out of Luka Doncic's hands, force the ball out of Kyrie Irving's hands, make the other guys work on the offensive side of the ball, make the other guys beat you, because for how much I love PJ Washington, for how much I love Derek Jones, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, even Dante Exum, Josh Green, Jaden Hardy, all those guys, I really like this Mavericks roster. I think this Mavericks roster is built perfectly. But when you take Doncic really necessarily, not out of the equation, but in a limited role in the finals, and you have to rely on Jaden Hardy, Josh Greens of the world, Derek Jones, PJ Washington's, love those guys. They are not going to get the job done. I'd be shocked if they did. I don't even remember the last time where a team was really keying in on a star player and the role player stepped up to the point where it was just shocking, and where it was like, oh, this role player is not looking like a role player, is looking like an all-star. Actually, now that I think about it, last year with Caleb Martin in the conference finals, I think that reminds me a little bit of what I'm just talking about right now. That's really the only time I've seen a role player step up that big, maybe even can you even call Insanity a role player situation? I can't, because Jeremy Lin was just that great. Maybe even TJ Warren in the bubble, but there really hasn't been situations in playoff series, situations where teams have to rely on their role players so much to the point where it actually works, where it's actually effective. It's just a rarity in today's game. It's something that's not likely going to happen. So if Drew Holiday can contain Luka Doncic, can contain Derek White, not Derek White, excuse me, he's on his team, contain Kyrie Irving, the Boston Celtics will be in a great position to win banner number 18. And yes, you could argue Jason Tatum, because Jason Tatum has had his shooting struggles this postseason. Jason Tatum, of course, the best player. He's probably the most impactful player for Boston. He's the guy who needs to take you there, because we know what he did last year in the finals. He wasn't great. Not last year, 2 years ago in the finals. He wasn't great. He didn't show up when it mattered in games 4 and game 6. He didn't play that great. Jaylen Brown played pretty solid, but Jason Tatum wasn't there. Jason Tatum needs to be at his absolute best. We know that. But for the purposes of what I've seen from the Dallas Mavericks and these guards who have been incredible, they are going to have to stop them. And Drew Holiday is probably the one guy that I trust to get a stop on a guy like Luka Doncic and on a guy like Kyrie Irving. So I think he's the most important. You can even argue Porzingis, because he stretches the floor, and Porzingis' health will be crucial in this series, because if Porzingis wasn't healthy, I think my pick pretty much would be set. I'm still thinking about my pick for the finals for Monday, because this finals is going to be incredible. This is going to be a great finals. I highly doubt this will be last year's finals, again with the Heat in Denver. I really don't think it's going to be a 5-game series. I think it'll at least be a 6-game series. I think this finals is going to be great. And there will be a difference with Porzingis as well. Porzingis will be a crucial part in this series for Boston. But at the end of the day, for how good Jason Tatum is, for how impactful he is, and Jaylen Brown, the guy who I know can be the best defender to stop two elite ball dominant and scoring guards is Drew Holiday, which is why I think he's the most important player for the Celtics. Let's go on a little bit to the coaching carousel, because there's been a lot of coaching decisions, a lot of coaching moves going on in the NBA in the past couple of weeks. Tyronn Lue, first I want to talk about him. He got an extension with the Los Angeles Clippers, if I believe it was 60 or 70 million. There was a lot of conflict going on with Tyronn Lue and the Los Angeles Clippers. Didn't really know how their extension talks were going. There was potential lingers that Tyronn Lue could have been the Los Angeles Lakers head coach if he didn't sign the extension. There was a lot of lingering, because we know what other coaches were paid. We know Eric Spoelstra got paid a lot. We know Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, the three probably most impactful coaches in the past decade or two. those guys got paid, and Tyronn Lue has been pretty great as well. Not necessarily on the tier of those guys, impactful wise and successful wise, but he's definitely right there. So Tyronn Lue got his money eventually, and he's staying with the Los Angeles Clippers. And I've always thought about this when I'm thinking of Tyronn Lue and his decision making on staying and coaching with the Clippers. You've had for what was it, 3-4 years now, the opportunity to win with Kawhi Leonard, with Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard's not healthy. So if you're Tyronn Lue, you're looking at the situation in Los Angeles. Is it that great of a situation? Do you really think you are going to win there compared to another team like the Lakers? I'm not saying the Lakers are better than the Clippers. I'm not saying that at all. But you look at the dynamics of it. Kawhi Leonard hasn't been healthy in years. The last time he was healthy was 2020 when they lost in the bubble. Really. And Kawhi Leonard has just not been there for the Clippers, and you could make the case that maybe another job would have been better for Tyronn Lue. Maybe he would have put pressure on the Clippers. We need Kawhi healthy to win a title, because I still think this is going to be a tough consideration and a tough job now for Tyronn Lue to remain with the Clippers. It's really a tough decision for him, because you look at the state of the Western Conference. You look at what Dallas is doing right now, what Minnesota's done. Denver's still in the mix. OKC is in the mix. The West is tough. The West is definitely tough. And Paul George could leave in free agency as well. So Tyronn Lue, I don't really personally agree with the idea that he should have stayed with the Clippers. I think if he went to the Lakers, even if he went back to Cleveland, I think he would have had a better opportunity to win. It's his decision, though, ultimately, and I can't really say anything about it. But Tyronn Lue does get that extension. He very well deserves it. But if you're him, do you really want to coach that Clippers team the way they have been the past couple of years? I wouldn't personally. It's a disaster. It is an absolute disaster there. So we'll see how this next Clippers season goes. And there may be questions raised about the Clippers, even though Kawhi got that extension for barely doing anything. Questions could be raised, and he could potentially get traded if they lose Paul George and if the Clippers have a disappointing season once again. Next coach I want to talk about is Brian Keefe with the Washington Wizards. Remember, he was the interim coach after Wes Unseld Jr. got essentially fired, removed, took a front office role. I think now he's an assistant coach with the Chicago Bulls under Billy Donovan's staff. But he replaced he replaced Wes Unseld Jr. and he, of course, it's the Wizards. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to improve on winning? Because the Wizards have just been an absolute crap show for the past couple of years. But Brian Keefe, he had a better record than Wes Unseld Jr., better winning percentage, really made some decent adjustments like putting Jordan Poole to the bench and giving young guys more opportunities to play. That's something I really liked about Brian Keefe. He's never coached as a head coach position before, but he is getting this opportunity. I would have liked to see maybe a young assistant coach to get this opportunity and to get this head coaching position. But at the end of the day, Brian Keefe didn't do half that bad of a job with Washington, so I'm not mad. And maybe you could have looked at a guy like Sam Cassell, maybe a Chris Quinn, somebody like that, and maybe even a Micah Nori as well, someone like that to take over this young team and build with them toward the future. But Brian O'Keefe didn't do that bad of a job, and I'm not really mad with the hire. And maybe you could have even given JJ Redick this team as well, because we know JJ Redick's pretty much done deal to the Lakers. We'll talk about that when we get to the offseason, because we want to focus on the finals right now. But JJ Redick is someone who I would have liked with this job rather than the Lakers, because more of a younger team, he can put his presence in the locker room kind of a situation, if you guys know what I mean. I feel like this would have been a better situation for JJ to emphasize his system, emphasize his playmaking system, because Washington shoots a lot of threes. JJ Redick can probably set up great actions to get Jordan Poole open on the 3-point line. I think he would have done great with a young Washington Wizards team rather than have all the pressure in Los Angeles in his first gig. That's just my opinion, though. Of course, JJ Redick is going to get the Lakers job, and we're going to see what happens. But I think JJ Redick would have been a perfect guy for this job. But I'm not mad about Brian O'Keefe. I'm just telling you what I think were other possibilities for this job. But Washington made their decision, and we'll see what happens. They may trade Kyle Kuzma, and they should. They do have the second pick, so they'll probably take whoever the Hawks don't take between Alex Sarr and Zachary Reicher. I can't even pronounce that last name. Whoever the Hawks don't take, the Wizards will probably end up taking. Don't really expect them to take anybody else in this draft. And considering they traded Gaffer, and Washington does need a big guy, so I think it will be a perfect fit. I don't know what this Jordan Poole thing's going to look like. I think, and the Tyus Jones situation, but Washington's going to need a couple more years to figure out this rebuilding situation and start winning basketball games. And I would have liked a young head coach there, but again, Keefe's great. Keefe's a great hire for the Wizards. And then finally, last thing on our coaching carousel, not necessarily coaching carousel, but coaching discussion here. Mike Brown and the Sacramento Kings are in contract holds. Mike Brown, of course, led the Sacramento Kings to the postseason last year for their first time in God knows, I don't even remember the year. And they pushed the Warriors to 7 games. They arguably should have won that playoff series. And this season, they were the 9 seed, made it to the second playing game, the final playing game, the 9-8 playing game for the 8 seed. Didn't make the postseason this year after getting the 3 seed last year. And it was a disappointing season for the Sacramento Kings, considering what they wanted to do, what their goals were for the season, looking to improve and looking to get to the second round and build upon last season. And that ultimately didn't happen this year. And Mike Brown thinks he deserves to get paid this big salary money because, again, just like Ty Lue, he's seeing these other coaches. He's seeing the Eric Spoelstras, the Steve Kerrs, the Greg Popovich, and even Monty Williams of the world getting paid. And we know Monty Williams' situation right now in Detroit. We know what's going on there. But Mike Brown is seeing this, and he's like, I just led this poverty franchise to the postseason. So where is my money? When am I going to get my rightful paycheck? And that he does have a case because Sacramento, remember, they had Michael Malone in 2014 season. DeMarcus Cousins had a fractured hand, and they started losing after DeMarcus Cousins got injured, and then they decided to fire Mike Malone. And obviously, we know the success Michael Malone has had with the Denver Nuggets, and they decided to fire Malone, and now they've been after head coach, and they shouldn't really give up this opportunity because Mike Brown's been their best head coach in years. Yes, David Joyger had a couple of good years in there. Luke Walton was there for a little bit, even Alvin Gentry 1 year. But there hasn't been a consistent coach. And I think Mike Brown's a great head coach, and he's been great for the Sacramento Kings. I just think the Western Conference was just that tough this season. And maybe the Kings get back in the postseason if they make a couple of moves. And I believe they will make a couple of moves. And I think they probably will have a good shot at getting back in the postseason. And I think Mike Brown gives them the best opportunity to do that. And I don't know why the Kings would not give him his money, because at the end of the day, like there's no really salary cap on coaches. Like, come on now. If you're the Kings, you should probably give Mike Brown what he deserves, because he did something that not a lot of coaches for Sacramento has done, which is lead them to the playoffs since the 2000s. It just hasn't been great ever since that 2002 conference finals when a little bit of controversy in that conference finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. That's for another day, though. But they've just been a poverty franchise, and I don't understand the one good head coach that you've had in the past 10 seasons you're potentially going to let walk off the door after the season, because this is the last year on Mike Brown's contract. This is a situation where if they don't sign an extension, Mike Brown can walk to another job that potentially opens up here. So this doesn't really make any sense for me. If I was Sacramento, I would extend him and I would get this deal done. And I think that's it for today, man. I think that's all we had to discuss for today. We got through Dallas. We got through Minnesota struggles. Of course, lights out Minnesota Timberwolves. And talked a little bit about the finals there. Mostly we're going to be doing a huge finals preview. Every single aspect about the NBA finals on Monday. That's exciting. I will get down to every little gritty, nitty detail possible. We will dive deep into every single matchup, every single player in the series, because it's going to be a great finals. Dallas and Boston expected to at least go 6. I still got to figure out my pick, as I said, over the weekend. But it should be great, and it should be one of those classic NBA finals. And the storyline, of course, in the finals is the Kristaps Porzingis aspect of things and the Kyrie Irving. Obviously, we know Porzingis played with Dallas, didn't really get along with Luka. We know the Kyrie in Boston saying, I'm going to resign, doesn't resign. People booing Kyrie. Kyrie sticking up the middle finger to fans, wiping his foot on the logo. This is going to be a great NBA Finals. It's going to be a great revenge series for Porzingis and Kyrie Irving. And we're just going to have to sit back and relax. And we're not going to have basketball for a week. So we will see what happens there. And enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the time off from basketball. Get your minds prepared for the NBA Finals because, as I mentioned, it's going to be a great one. Remember to follow me on Instagram at take_your_shot_podcast_. That's at take_your_shot_podcast_. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. That's all my shots for the day, folks. As I said, have a wonderful weekend. And we will see you Monday to preview the NBA Finals. Leave a like and subscribe for me. It would mean a lot. And also follow me on TikTok as well because we are starting to do some TikTok content. I think the TikTok is Take Your Shot, if I'm not mistaken. Follow me on TikTok as well because we're doing some content there. Very exciting stuff happening. And we will see you Monday for the preview of the NBA Finals. Again, have a great weekend, folks.